Welcome to the Hall of My Art. Our next speaker is Dr. Timothy Owens Moore. He's the author of 2 books. The first one being The Science of Melanin, Dispelling the Myth. The second one, Dark Matters, Dark Secrets, and that is all of us. So now please give a big round welcome of applause to Dr. Timothy Owens Moore.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters and little ones. Black Christ Conference. Yes, I've written a book on melanin, and the new recent book is called Dark Matters, Dark Secrets. But I think with this first conference here, it's testimony that there are people in the community that are trying to do things. There are a few proud and chosen that are trying to learn. And as we learn, we then what? Pass it on. So as with the next few lectures and conferences come on, the Hall of My Art is going to be filled. Because once people start hearing and understanding that, wow, there's another knowledge, not so much knowledge, another truth out there, because there's always 2 sides of truth. You know, there's more information out there, and that's what people are lacking, if you really think about it, information. We're all right here now struggling with where do we stand in life, where is our position? And for me, a lot of the things that I do that are right is try to kind of reset our minds. I mean, we know that we've gone through the whole enslavement process, being prisoners here in America, being taught by others. And if you think about it, we're the only people that have our children taught by somebody else, which really then dictates how it is that our knowledge base may not be something that's for us. So that means if we aren't writing our own books, establishing our own organizations, just met the brother here, Brother Kurt. So he's at Clark Atlanta. I'm at Clark Atlanta. He's no longer at Clark Atlanta. He's doing some positive things in the community. Got a little newsletter here called Divine Wisdom, right? A homeopathic type of institute. Spiritual, okay?
With an indigenous perspective.
All right. So beyond the academic setting, there are ways that we can take our knowledge to the people, and that's exactly what Kurt is doing. What I want to do today is just present some information to you in the context of melanin, black people, and also maybe take it back to looking at Christ, since that's what this conference is about, and many people are probably here for that type of information. Let me just show this first slide here, or transparency, because I use this as the front cover of my book, because on the front is a picture of Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their children, and the sun shining. Well, the sun is shining, and at the end of these rays are hands, and also near the face region or nose region are ankhs. I'm pretty sure many of you know what the ankh is in terms of African terminology. The ankh is a symbol for life. It's the symbol that then Christians have used for the so-called cross. So for myself, looking back on history, you start to go back to see that really there's nothing new. Things have been done. People have now used it in different ways, and that's why we're now here confused about many realities. So this is back in some place called Kemet. Kemet. What is Kemet? Egypt. Jesus went to Africa, went to Tibet, went to India. He went all over studying. But guess what? Many of those travels and books are not in your regular Bible, right? I think Amrani was talking about several books, and I came in late, didn't hear all of the books, but was the Aquarium Gospel of Jesus mentioned? Aquarium Gospel of Jesus the Christ. Anybody familiar with the text? Raise your hands. Okay. These are missing books of the Bible. Okay, they can't be missing because they're in my hand, huh? The books that have been taken out because it makes it easier to explain, however King James did it when he explained it in the Bible. Okay, so we now start to understand, hey, maybe there's some confusion about Christianity or religion if people have been manipulating the so-called discussion of it. I don't know if you talked about the Nicene Conference, where the Europeans went in and they manipulated and said, this is what we're going to call Christianity. And that was like 325 AD. So given that we're talking about a time period that is well before slavery, well before the European conquest, But it's on the downfall of what? Egypt. So the point is, back in the time when Egypt was flourishing, people were going there. Let's use the word Kemet, because we got to start kind of using terminology that really, okay? So if we go to Kemet, where Jesus went, he was studying under masters. They say the same thing about Moses. He was, what, got all this great knowledge, but he still had to go to what? Africa to get information, to learn. And that's what we don't understand today, because we just think of Africa as backwards. We think of Africa as no buildings, no knowledge, no nothing. They've contributed everything we know about science, technology, and civilization. There wasn't civilization going on in Europe during the time periods that people were building pyramids, temples, literature, art. No. People in other parts of the world, due to the environments they were living in, were struggling. Africa presents a different context because people have time to what? Sit back and read. Time to think. If you think about it today, bring it up to this current day, this current day society, many people don't have time to think. TV, radio, soccer practice, kids, children, work. So don't take the time to what? Reflect on yourself. Well, that's what Jesus did in terms of some of the books that were missing in the Bible. There was really one particular chapter I wanted to read. It was chapter 55. It's really at the end of the section on life and works of Jesus in Egypt. So there's actually 8 chapters that have been removed. And again, this whole book has many chapters, but I just wanted to talk about it in context of where he had been going in terms of reaching a spiritual state that made him the phenomenal person that he was. But we have to understand, because you did mention what the world's 16 crucified saviors, he wasn't the only one. There were many others. He was just one that the system has utilized as one person that has had a great manifestation on people. What we need to study is how he did that. What did he go through? Because all of us have that ability to reach that so-called Christ consciousness, right? Chapter, just a few parts, or the last part of the life and works. Chapter 55 says, Jesus passes the 7th brotherhood test, and in the purple room of the temple receives the 7th, the highest degree, the Christ. He leaves the temple a conqueror. Now, prior to this, you know about Muhammad with Islam. He had to go fast and pray for 40 days, 40 nights. The same thing with Jesus. He had to go somewhere. He had to fast and pray. Fasting is very important. Praying is very important. What are you doing? Tuning into who? Self. Rather than having a television tell you a vision, right? Rather than having a radio come in and put thoughts in your mind. So in the past, when people reached this so-called state, this higher state of consciousness, you had to have an environment that was conducive to that, like a hall of my eye, potentially. I didn't get a chance to do that, but thank Brother Pierre Carson for even putting this together. I just think this is phenomenal in itself. He now has a new colleague, Dorothy Anderson. Now we have, I'm pretty sure, some more phenomenal events that will be occurring. But the point is, we then have to take that knowledge, pass it on, as the term goes, each one teach one, right? So in this chapter, it says, the work of Jesus in the chamber of the dead was done. In the temple purple room, he stood before the Hierophant. Hierophant is spelled Hierophaint. It's really like a term for a priest, a very important person that was in that time of Kemet. The training, it's like, have you heard of George G.M. James, Stolen Legacy? Okay. In Stolen Legacy, he gives a breakdown of the Egyptian mystery system. Well, it really wasn't a mystery. It was a mystery to white people. So it was a way to kind of write things up so they wouldn't understand it. Because if you think about hieroglyphics, hieroglyphics is a Greek term for symbols. Symbols. That's all it was for Europeans. Now, for us, it had meaning. They were words of life. It wasn't hieroglyphics. They were called medu neter. So medu neter means words from God. So for us, symbols mean a whole lot of things. That's why we say, "Yo, that's fat." What do you mean that's fat? Big? No, that's cool. What do you mean by it? So we have, in our terminology, different ways that we express things. So you can see the same thing with symbols, okay? For example, with reading, for us today, reading is from left to right. You can't read backwards or up and down, but the so-called Melanin, you can read the same symbols up and down, left to right, or even the other way. Even though it's the same symbols, that has a different meaning. So it relates, again, like I said, to how we express ourselves and relate today. It says, and he was clothed in purple robes, and all the brothers stood. The Hierophant arose and said, and with this purple is kind of important, because have any of you heard of the chakra system? Okay, spiritual centers that are in our body. Well, the highest one is the so-called crown chakra, and it relates to an area in the brain called the pineal gland. And if we have time to discuss it today, we will show where that is. The point is, those who are clairvoyant, who can see, things that we can't see. Everybody says there's an aura that people have. Well, there are some people that can really see the aura around a person. Well, when people reach a certain state of consciousness, there may be like a glow around their head. And you've seen many of their pictures, and not the blonde, blue-haired eyed Jesus that you mostly see, But the example here is that you usually see a picture of Christ with a so-called halo around the head. The crown chakra produces a color in the spectrum of purple. So this purple robe, I think, is very significant, and the purple robe that he has on during this time period really does relate to this higher state of consciousness. So it's now what? All connected. That's the point I'm trying to make there. This is a royal day for all the hosts of Israel. In honor of their chosen son, we celebrate the great Passover feast. And then he said to Jesus, brother man, most excellent of men, in all the temple test, you have won out. 6 times before the bar of right you have been judged. And 666, so this time it's the 7th one. 6 times you have received the highest honors man can give, and now you stand prepared to take the last degree. Upon your brow I place this diadem. So again, brow, this so-called higher state of consciousness. Again, the crown chakra, purple. And in the great lodge of the heavens and earth, you are the Christ. This is your great Passover rite. You are a neophyte no more, but now a mastermind. Now man can do no more, but God himself will speak and will confirm your title and degree. Go on your way, for you must preach the gospel of good will to men and peace on earth, must open up the prison doors and set the captives free. And while the Hierophant yet spoke, the temple bells rang out. A pure white dove descended from above and sat on Jesus' head. And then a voice that shook the very temple said, this is the Christ. And every living creature said, Amen. The great doors of the temple swung ajar. The Logos journeyed on his way a conqueror. 18 years of his life is missing from the Bible that we read from the so-called King James Version. 18 years. Here's just one little example of something he had gone through during that time period. So the point is, as I present this piece, then to go on to talk about the dark matters, dark secrets. So when you start talking about history, there is no way we're going to get a grounding of history in the churches today, because in the pulpit, they're not teaching history. It's an emotional center where people's emotions are generated and charged up. But what did you really learn after that so-called feeling? So what should be coming from the pulpit is talking about what? History. Because once you have a grounding in history, you now walk differently, don't you? So that's the reason why I have taken the attempt to try to put some relevance to this topic of melanin, to make sure that we understand that it is very important for us as African people. Why are we scared of it today? They called the sun Ra, or Atan. So Nefertiti, Akhenaten, they came up with this monotheism, praising what? One God. So for them, the God was sun. And basically the sun produces what? Life. Without the sun, there is no life. It's the generator. And what are we? Nothing but walking generators. Without the sun's energy, we then don't exist. So we are like plants. Plants need the sun, the so-called photosynthetic process, which you may remember from biology class, right? Okay. So in photosynthesis, there's a very important so-called, very important chemical that helps out with this transformation. It's called chlorophyll. Plants have chlorophyll. It's a pigment. We have something called chlorophyll, but we call it melanin. So when you start breaking things down in its most simplistic manner, oh, okay, now I can understand, and now I can see. So that's the reason why we need to have discussions pertaining to melanin. Any questions before I go on? In terms of because like I said, I'm going to move beyond the religion or Christ part only because I'm trying to now move into what I was brought here to talk about. But any questions? I guess most people knew that there were some missing books of the Bible. That's not okay. So it's just a matter of now reading and understanding that. So as we start to look at pictures of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, you see, they always said that Akhenaten was. They even questioned him. They say he's a homosexual because he wears woman type wear. They said he was deformed because his head had a long shape to it, and the term is called dolicephalic. But they considered him to be deformed. He was something weird. So you got now Europeans writing history saying something about this man. Okay, he came from a long tradition of, great people, but he's now some deformed person. Nefertiti's image, it's written, it's on the temples. But when you start messing around with the European, this is their picture of Nefertiti. So she's now no longer an African woman. She's quite clearly a European woman with no pigment, living in hot Africa. That doesn't kind of make too much sense, does it? Albino, living in Africa, like that. So there are several books to read to kind of correct the history. And I don't know if you ever read Egypt Revisited by edited by Ivan Van Sertima. Egypt Revisited by Ivan Van Sertima. This is a chapter from Asa Hilliard's work. Down. Okay. So what I have to do is probably keep moving the transparencies, Pierre. I just have to keep moving the transparencies. You can say lower or higher. So this bust that you just saw of this white Nefertiti, the bust that we recognize today as that of Nefertiti was found 1912 to 1913 in grid 47 at Armana by professors Hermann Rank and Ludwig Borchardt. It was out of circulation from that time until 1920 when it was found in Berlin. It has no inscriptions. Identification of this as a bust of Nefertiti is done mainly by reference to the royal headdress and by its proximity to a destroyed bust of Akhenaten in an artist's workshop. Also, it is inlaid with lapis lazuli, an expensive precious stone that was reserved for royalty. What is important is that there are numerous wall reliefs that depict Nefertiti with certainty, yet they are very different from the Berlin bust. One of them is shown above. So you can see that she got the big lips, not the skinny European lips. She has a long, can't really say a long head with her because of the headdress that's on, but quite clearly that ain't the same one that you see that they're marketing. Okay. Several Egyptologists claim that Nefertiti was Kemetic. Cottrell says that Queen Ti's brother was I, or A, later to become the king, and that A was the father of Nefertiti. Alfred also says that Nefertiti was I's daughter, since he is referred in some inscriptions as the father-in-law of the king. However, since most 18th dynasty kings and had many wives, the reference to a single father-in-law as certainly the father of the Queen Nefertiti cannot be a confident one. So we can get into all the parentage and the families, but the point is about the time periods. The most dynamic and unquestionably in full black dynasties in Egypt were 1 through 6, 1825, 18th dynasty. There was no question. It was a black dynasty. So to throw these other images in there, again, it just misconstrues history and it makes us not understand things in context. So as we deal with, again, the Black Christ, we just have to understand history is kind of important rather than dealing with just some terms that may be stated during that Sunday morning and you leave and not know what the heck was ever said. So this whole thing about color. So color was despised But this is just a little ad from, you know how they have those Sunday papers and they got ads for things you can buy. Retinol, wrinkles diminish. Some kind of vitamin A cream. Just one example of they're doing whatever they can to make their skin look nice. Well, what is it in African people or people of hue, humans, that give them color? The pigment, melanin. It also helps to what reduce the aging process or diminish its aging process. So that's why you probably look at me. He's a young guy. He can't know all this stuff. You know, well, I got a little age on me. But the point is, us as African skin. So I'm just trying to present a context for why this melanin thing is kind of a controversy or is confusing to some because the people who control the dissemination of information don't necessarily like you. So one example of how